Hello, lovely people. Welcome back to the Fundamentally Fit podcast with me, your host, Andy Strong. Yes, it's episode number 8. We've just got one topic on the cards today. It's quite a big one. It's quite a juicy one. It's quite a ridiculous one. And I know it's one that everybody will have heard or read or will have been told about by somebody they know. And that is regular alcohol consumption could cut your diabetes risk. Study finds, not cited, just study finds. Now this actually been reported today. So it's 28th of July today. This has been widely reported in all of the media, online, many different outlets. I've pulled an article from The Guardian online, which I'm going to be citing and kind of reading out from in a mo and giving you a bit of a rundown on what they've said about this study. But this one frustrated me the moment that I heard it, and I could easily turn this podcast into a rant, and I'm going to restrain myself today, and I'm going to make sure this is a positive, and I am going to give you a complete rundown of obviously what they've said in this article. I'm not going to cite the study too much because actually the broader, wider view on this is the more sensible one, and I'm going to give you an understanding of what diabetes is, or what type 2 diabetes is. I'm going to give you an understanding of how it affects your body, and I'm going to let you leave this podcast today hopefully much clearer on what this condition actually means and how you can actually avoid it or manage your eating to deal with it. I'm going to keep this really simple because many myths have, kind of exist around diabetes type 2 particularly, and many still think that it is actually caused by sugar, as that is one of those heavy myths that's kind of out there at the moment. But that being said, we're going to come to that in a moment. It is summer holidays, so how are you all getting on? Are you enjoying this inclement weather that we're having? This sunshine one moment, rain the next. It is classic British summertime. We seem to have left those heady days of 2 weeks ago and heat waves behind us, which is a shame. And it is now definitely gone back to classic erratic summer weather. But I hope you are using the opportunity, if you are on holiday, to be more active. And this is a really interesting time of year, not just because the kids are off and obviously it changes our routine, but also how we actually approach our diets and our exercise regimes and our goals as well. Now, I see August and December as being identical months in how my clients typically will respond and react to their diets and how they're getting on moving towards their goals. And the reason for this, if we think of December, people can probably jump on board with this a little bit more quickly, but we get to that point in December where we kind of naturally give up. We kind of decide to go with the flow and kind of wait out until January before we restart our diets, restart our exercise regimes, and maybe restart setting some new goals or New Year's resolutions. You know, this is because we have so many parties, we have so many work dues, friends that we catch up with drinks, family to go and see, and we kind of hit that point in December where we just go, do you know what? I'm just gonna wait now, and I'm just gonna start again next year. And you know, that happens every year. But August is incredibly similar. People act in exactly the same way. And the reason for this is because, well, there's a few reasons for this. One, the kids are off, so that creates a brand new, different normal for 6 to 8 weeks, depending how long they're off. It creates a situation where your regular routine has changed. You're doing things, going places you don't normally go, which quite often means eating differently and not necessarily always in a good way. We all have, or many of us have, summer-related goals. So whether you're slimming down for a wedding, you're doing a triathlon, taking on a 10K for the first time, doing Race for Life, or anything like that, once that goal has been achieved and is ticked off the list of things to do for that year, people can go into relax mode or relax or relapse, whichever you prefer, and then if they don't set another goal immediately after, then they can start to decline, go back to their old eating habits, start to maybe put the weight back on, and then they can find themselves in a position where actually summer then becomes a big kind of almost party, more barbecues, all those kinds of things, and then it's a case of, do you know what, I'm going to wait till September when I get back to work, the kids go back to school, and then I can focus on myself again. And that is remarkably similar to December, and it happens every year. So check in with yourself, ask how you're doing with your diet, what can you do to make it easier, what can you do to make smarter choices. Usually the best place I find to start: are you getting enough sleep? Are you getting in enough water? Are you hitting your 5 a day? And if you can tick those things off, then you usually set up to make better decisions. Make sure you're planning out your week's meals as best as possible, because when we don't do our prep and we don't do our planning and we don't get enough sleep, that puts us into a really negative place, and it's much harder to keep on track, even to maintain our weight. So This week we had the Elmbridge 10K, which was a nice local race run by the Elmbridge Roadrunners, which is a really, really well organised race, quite a big event actually. And I had myself and Kirsty, we both ran, along with two of my clients, Pippa and Nicola. Nicola's first proper 10K, so well done to Nicola, she did phenomenally well. She's training for the Richmond Half in September. Well done to Pippa as well, she had a really, really strong run. Nice medal as well, which is always good. And if you head over to the Facebook page, Fundamentally Fit, or our YouTube channel, there is a short video there of how we got on at the weekend. Right, roll your sleeves up, buckle in, don't open the wine. I'm about to tell you why claiming regular alcohol consumption cuts diabetes risk is actually missing the point. So let's go, let's do this. Many studies, lots of different publications, 28th of July, have reported, and I'm using this article that I pulled off the Telegraph online, and this is how it goes. Regular alcohol consumption could cut diabetes risk, study finds. Drinking a moderate amount of certain drinks, such as wine, 3 to 4 times a week could reduce diabetes risk by about 30%. Now, consuming alcohol 3 or 4 days per week was associated with reduced risk of developing diabetes, a 27% reduction in men and a 32% reduction in women compared with abstaining, scientists found. So basically they're saying is that if you drink regularly 3 to 4 times per week, then you're going to reduce your risk of diabetes a little bit more if you're a woman, but still at around 27% for men, and this was compared with those that didn't drink at all. Now, wine was considered particularly beneficial, probably because it has chemical compounds that improve blood sugar balance, researchers in Denmark found. Now, gin could have the opposite effect. Oh man, that's disappointing. Gin could have the opposite effect, along with other spirits, which increase women's chance of getting diabetes by 83%. Experts said the findings published in the journal Diabetologia should not be seen as a green light to drink more than existing NHS guidelines. So that's a very brief overview of what the study, or what has been reported on the study. It's actually quite brief, to be fair. Lots of outlets have reported on this, so you'll have no problem in finding this. I'm sure you've already heard or seen it. I'm not going to go into too much about what the study has actually said. I'm actually going to take a bigger picture on this and actually try and give you a little bit of understanding of what diabetes really is all about. And then you'll understand that some of the things in here are actually not irrelevant, but cherry-picked to just give a headline, which actually doesn't give you any of the information that you really need as the end user, consumer, or for your actual health, whichever way you choose to look at it. So, diabetes. Diabetes, people think and still believe, is down to the amount of sugar that we eat, and this is actually a misconception. Now, I'm going to go slightly technical, but bear with me, okay? The brain itself is what we call an obligate glucose user. Now, what that means is that it requires around 100 grams of glucose per day. Now, all of the carbohydrates that we eat and all of the food that we eat for energy purposes eventually gets broken down into glucose, because that is what we call the energy currency of the body. So the brain itself needs 100 grams of glucose a day to run. Now, it doesn't technically actually need that from carbohydrates, although it does prefer it. Carbohydrates are the body's preferred source of fuel, but it can actually do that from other sources, breaking down fat. But we don't want to go down that rabbit hole, because there's a lot of different things that we could get drawn into. So basically, simply put, all of the carbohydrates that we eat will get broken down into glucose so that they can be used in the body, used by the brain, or stored as fat, bearing in mind, depending on how much we've got coming in. So the concept of eating no sugar diets or a sugar-free diet actually is not really true, because you're looking to reduce the added sugar. You can't reduce sugars because carbohydrates are actually sugars. They're many, many different types of sugar. Now, in terms of diabetes, what happens is when we eat a meal, our blood glucose levels will start to rise. And those blood glucose levels will rise to a certain point, and they'll pass a threshold. Now, once they pass that threshold, the body will signal that it's time to bring those blood glucose levels down, because they're reaching a level that's becoming toxic in the blood. So when the brain realizes this, sends a signal to the pancreas, and the pancreas will release insulin. Now, insulin is a hormone that is designed to bring that blood glucose or blood sugar back down into a safe range. Now what happens then is if we don't eat again and we don't balance those sugar levels out, they'll come back down to the point that we'll pass another threshold, and the body will then start to signal that we need to release glucagon, which is another hormone that will help us to signal either to start eating or to start breaking down fat to bring our glucose in our blood back up to a safe level. And these two work synergistically. So the easiest way to think of this is like your boiler at home. Okay, so when it's on a thermostat, when the temperature drops to a certain level, the boiler comes back on, and when it reaches a certain temperature at the top, the boiler switches itself off. This is exactly the same principle as how your body manages its blood glucose levels based on what you've eaten and based what goes in. Now this is all very well, this is nice and straightforward. However, this is the complication that comes in with sugar. Now, sugar is a or added sugar, as we know it, is very, very simple in its structure. And basically what that means is that when we have a high sugar food, something like maybe orange juice or something like a Mars bar, something like a fizzy drink, there's really, really high concentration of sugar in that product, which that means that when we take it on, there's virtually no digestion that needs to take place. There's no breaking down of anything that the body needs to physically do, and therefore it enters the bloodstream enters the bloodstream very, very quickly. And what this means is that the level of blood glucose reaches that threshold really fast because the blood has become saturated with blood glucose, and then the pancreas has to signal to release insulin to bring it back down to a safe level. Now, what can happen over a period of time if we keep doing this and we keep eating high sugary foods, it can stress the pancreas to the point where it then doesn't register when the blood glucose has come past that threshold. Now, once we pass that, what happens then is instead of passing that threshold and insulin being released, that blood glucose is allowed to continue to rise. And when this happens, it leaves the body in a state where it's actually the blood has become quite toxic. And this can then lead to, if it happens long term, can lead to type 2 diabetes, where you then need to medicate to help the control of your blood glucose or your blood sugar levels. Okay, so take a breath there. So, I'm just going to recap. Your blood glucose is managed like a boiler at home. When the system is too low, when the room temperature is too low, the boiler comes on to warm it up, and when they reach a certain temperature at the top, it turns off and lets the temperature drop back down. Now, if it doesn't register the temperature at the top, the boiler will keep going up and away, and the temperature in the room will keep rising. It's exactly the same for your blood glucose. If your pancreas has become desensitized to the effects of the glucose in the blood, then it's not going to register it anymore, and your blood glucose is going to continue to rise. So that's the basic, simple overview. So we can't stop eating carbohydrates, and we don't need to. We just need to eat smarter, more sensible choices. And if you need help with that, please get in touch. I can happily provide some coaching and help you understand a little bit more about that. But in general terms, we don't need to stop eating sugar. We just need to reduce the amount of added sugar, because that added sugar is such a high concentrate that it goes in far, far too quickly. Now, there's a little bit more to this. It isn't that simple, and it's why people think, for this very reason that I've just explained, that they think that sugar is why we get diabetes, and it isn't that simple. You can get type 2 diabetes just because you've got type 2 diabetes. It can just be one of those conditions that you develop. You don't have to be overweight for that to happen, but it is heavily influenced by lifestyle factors. And this is the second part to this. So if you are overweight or obese, you are statistically more likely to develop high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, all of these different conditions. And part of that is because you're just at a higher risk because your diet is poorer, your body is struggling to cope with all those different demands being placed on it. But if we look specifically at diabetes, what happens is it affects your insulin sensitivity. And insulin sensitivity is one of these expressions that kind of is usually quite misunderstood. So insulin sensitivity basically means your pancreas's ability to register when it needs to release insulin. So basically, let's say you've had a Mars bar, okay? That sugar has entered your blood really quickly, so your blood glucose has started to rise. It goes past the threshold where the pancreas should release the insulin, but your insulin sensitivity is now not so high, and it allows it to rise up. If you had greater insulin sensitivity, the moment your blood glucose passes that threshold, the pancreas would release insulin and it would bring that blood glucose back down. So we actually want more insulin sensitivity, because the more insulin sensitive you are, the more effective you are at managing blood glucose, keeping it between the safe levels. If your insulin sensitivity drops, then it's less able to manage that, and it's more likely to let blood glucose drift past a safe level and make that level of blood glucose remain toxic at a high level. So stay with me. I know this is slightly more complicated today. So if we increase our insulin sensitivity, we're better able to manage our blood sugar levels or our blood glucose levels, put simply. The issue with obesity and being overweight is a problem, because the way that our body reacts when we are overweight automatically makes us less insulin sensitive, which means we're less able to process and understand when we need to release that insulin from the pancreas. If we then add this to the fact that people who are generally overweight and obese have poorer diets, then the foods they are eating are much more likely to be those calorie dense, high sugar dense foods. So that will be things like our Mars bars and our fizzy drinks. So they're more likely to be having the foods that have the biggest impact on our blood sugar levels. But the fact that they're overweight also means that they're the ones that have least insulin sensitivity, and therefore they're the ones that are going to suffer with struggling to manage these insulin levels, or these blood glucose levels. So we start to see one working against the other. We also see the other thing that actually isn't just sugar that causes this problem, it's actually all the food that we eat. It's more pronounced the more simple the type of sugar is. So if it's a Mars bar or a fizzy drink and it's refined sugars, it's going to be really rapid. But actually, if we're eating too much and taking on too many calories, then the requirement of the body to actually respond to food is going to be greater. What we also see in people that are overweight is that their food choices are generally poorer, meaning they're eating higher saturated fats, higher fatty foods, higher calorie dense foods. And that's the important thing to remember. They're calorie dense foods, which would be things like your Mars bars, your chocolate, your maybe fried chicken, maybe Chinese takeaways, really calorie dense, fat dense, and this is more likely to then make them overweight, even more so, which reduces their insulin sensitivity further, and then you get more high sugar foods, which are impacting the pancreas more rapidly and more frequently, and over time this just leads to a desensitization of the pancreas and a reduced ability for it to manage that kind of up and down roller coaster of highs and lows in your blood glucose. This then can eventually lead to type 2 diabetes and the potential for needing medication and a complete lifestyle overhaul to manage it. So that is the basics of how it works. It doesn't matter. It's not all about not eating sugar. It's about eating less refined sugar, less added sugar, and it's about eating a sensible, balanced diet, more whole foods, and understanding this makeup of foods and how you eat them to kind of get those energy levels and those blood glucose levels balanced. This will have a big impact on all areas of your life. Now back to this study. The big thing we can take away from this is that, there might be some research indicating that certain amounts of alcohol intake might be beneficial, might not be beneficial for diabetes. I'm not in a position to make that judgment, and certainly I haven't had a chance to read this study yet to see what conclusions it's drawn. But what I can say with confidence is that alcohol is high in calories. Therefore, if you're drinking more alcohol, you're more likely to be overweight. Alcohol also, as well, will impact your sleeping patterns, which means you're more likely to sleep poorly if you're drinking alcohol on a regular basis. If you're sleeping poorly or not as deeply, then you're more likely to have more cortisol, the stress hormone in your blood and in your body. And if that happens, then you're less likely to sleep well the next night. And all the time this is happening during through the day, you're less insulin sensitive anyway. You're more likely to store food as fats. You're more likely to crave sugary foods. You're more likely to be irritable. You're more likely to have headaches. All the many different things that go with having deprived sleep. And actually, the alcohol in here might reduce your risk of diabetes, but the knock-on effect of drinking alcohol regularly will have such an impact on the rest of your health that actually your risk of diabetes will be high anyway. So, thinking that drinking alcohol is helping is a very misleading statement. It may have some impact in certain parameters things. But, if your lifestyle is poor, drinking wine and thinking that it's going to stop you getting diabetes is a very dangerous mindset to have. And again, it's a difficult one to kind of put into a podcast and really make it clear. I'd love to work with you if you're confused about this and you want some help, because I can really genuinely put this across and help you understand how we can tackle this in your diet. This podcast is not really about being a sales pitch, but this is quite an interesting topic. But really it's about understanding that bigger picture. Wine has a lot of calories in it. If we're drinking more wine more regularly, we're going to be sleeping more poorly. We're going to make poorer choices the next day because of it. We're going to have more cortisol in our system, more stress that we're trying to manage. We all go to different extremes when we're stressed. A lot of us turn to food. I know I do. And actually, the basics of this study is just a typical kind of thing that they do, where they just cherry pick one or two little things from a study and then they throw it at a headline, and all it does is to serve is to confuse people. Now, hopefully people will look at this and say, oh, this doesn't make sense, I don't understand it. Disappointingly, I think few will really understand why this is misleading, or why this isn't actually genuinely helpful information, and actually how this study or the way this has been reported is supposed to be helpful for people make a decision, because they're saying, oh, it could help reduce it, but their kind of disclaimer they've thrown in the last line is, oh, but we're not recommending that you don't follow the NHS helpline, the NHS guidelines, in which case why print it, because it's not helpful to people. So I'm going to go into a rant if I'm not careful. I don't want to be an angry place. So yes, that is alcohol and diabetes. It's much more important that you have a well-balanced diet, you manage your calorie intake, you manage what you're eating, you manage the quality of the food that's going in, and we try and avoid those really high calorie dense foods, the fats and the poor high sugary foods. That's going to be a much better way. Avoiding too much alcohol. Again, alcohol has a big impact on your liver health, as well as many other areas of your life as well. So I'm going to take a breath. I feel like I've done that whole bit without breathing at all. But that is this week's podcast. A little bit shorter this week, just the one topic. That's podcast number 8. Hopefully clearing up a little bit of the confusion. If you want some more help with this, get in touch, andy@fundamentallyfit.co.uk, or head over to fundamentallyfit.co.uk. Request a consultation. Happy to jump on a call. Happy to give you some advice. If you're not sure about diabetes or how to manage your diet around this situation, I would be delighted to help you with that. If not, I hope this has been useful. I hope it's cleared up a few things. Sugar is not causing diabetes. It's a contributing factor, as is many other things. But the biggest thing we can all do is to manage our weight, improve our insulin sensitivity by being a healthy weight, eating more whole foods, less added sugars, and not too much alcohol. If we do that, we'll all be a happier, healthier nation and a happier, healthy group of individuals. If you have any questions, pop them over to andy@fundamentallyfit.co.uk. Happy to help you out. Pop them in the comments section over on YouTube. Happy to help out there as well. If you've enjoyed this podcast, give us a little heart, give us a little thumbs up, give us a little bit of love, even leave us a review or a few comments. That would be awesome. But if not, have a great weekend. Enjoy what I'm hoping will be sunshine. I think it's going to rain. And yes, I'm off to the Royal Albert Hall for afternoon tea. Probably a little bit too much sugar there, but I'm also doing the Wedding Day run, which is a 7k run in Bushy Park tonight. So I am looking forward to that. It's an awesome t-shirt. But yes, that is podcast number 8. Have a fantastic weekend, and I will see you or talk to you next week.